Ever had someone steal your house for spiritual enlightenment? Smash that like button if you think entitled people need their own wildlife preserve, and comment if you've ever wanted to turn someone's chakras into a pretzel. 3 months ago, I inherited my uncle's cabin nestled in the Colorado Rockies, a rustic slice of heaven at 8,500 feet, where the air is thin and the Wi-Fi is thinner. Uncle Pete had lived there for 37 years, collecting vintage license plates and perfecting his sourdough starter like some sort of mountain hermit with surprisingly good taste in bread. The cabin wasn't much to look at from the outside: weathered cedar logs, a tin roof that sang opera during hailstorms, and a wraparound porch that had seen better decades. But it was mine, legally documented and everything, which apparently meant absolutely nothing to Karen Enlightened Soul Morrison. I should have known trouble was brewing the moment I pulled up that crisp October morning and found a woman in head-to-toe Lululemon doing what looked like an interpretive dance on my front porch. She had that particular shade of bleached blonde hair that screams, "I'd like to speak to your manager's manager," and the kind of yoga mat that probably cost more than my car payment. "Excuse me," I said, climbing out of my beat-up Subaru with all the diplomatic grace of someone who'd just driven 6 hours through mountain curves. "You're on my property." She turned toward me with the serene smile of someone who'd clearly confused spiritual enlightenment with social entitlement. "Oh, you must be Pete's nephew. I'm Karen Morrison, and I've been maintaining the energy balance of this sacred space since your uncle passed." She gestured at my cabin like she was introducing me to the Dalai Lama's summer home. Maintaining the energy balance. Right. Because nothing says sacred space like someone else's deed in your name. "That's nice," I managed, setting down my duffel bag and trying to process why this woman was talking about my inherited property like it was her personal ashram. "But I live here now, so—" "Actually," Karen interrupted, pulling out what appeared to be a laminated document from her designer yoga bag. "The Pinecrest Community Wellness Initiative has designated this location as a healing sanctuary for our twice-weekly sessions. We've been using it for 3 months now, and the community really depends on this space." She handed me the paper with the confidence of someone presenting the Declaration of Independence. It was a petition signed by 12 people, requesting that my uncle's property be preserved for community spiritual wellness. At the top, in Karen's flowing handwriting, it read, "Sacred Space Protection Initiative, honoring Pete's legacy of openness." I stared at the document, then at Karen, then back at the document. My Uncle Pete? The guy who once chased 3 hikers off his property with a spatula because they stepped on his petunias? That Pete. He was on quite the spiritual journey toward the end, Karen said with the kind of pitying tone usually reserved for people who don't understand the healing properties of crystals. He told me himself that he wanted this place to bring peace to others. Now, I'd known Uncle Pete my entire life. The man's idea of spiritual enlightenment was a good bourbon and a John Wayne movie. If he'd told Karen anything, it was probably directions to the nearest exit, preferably delivered with his trademark sarcasm and a healthy dose of profanity. "Look," I said, folding the petition and handing it back to her. "I appreciate your community initiative, but this is my home now. You're going to have to find somewhere else to find your inner peace." Karen's serene smile flickered like a candle in a hurricane. "I don't think you understand. We have a moral obligation to preserve sacred spaces. The universe led us to this location for a reason." "The universe?" "Of course. Because when in doubt, blame cosmic forces for your real estate ambitions. The universe also led me to inherit this place legally," I replied, pulling my keys from my pocket. "And right now, the universe is telling me to go inside and unpack." As I walked toward my front door, Karen called after me. "We'll be back Thursday at sunrise for our session. The healing circle can't be broken." I paused with my key halfway to the lock. "The what now?" "Our dawn meditation and community yoga practice. We've built such beautiful energy here. It would be devastating to disrupt the spiritual ecosystem we've created." Spiritual ecosystem. I was starting to think Karen had been breathing too much thin mountain air. "Well," I said, opening my door and stepping inside, "you might want to start building that beautiful energy somewhere else, because this ecosystem is officially closed for business. I closed the door behind me and leaned against it, listening to the sound of Karen's expensive yoga mat being rolled up with what I could only describe as aggressive spirituality. Through the window, I watched her load her meditation supplies into a white Tesla with a Namaste bumper sticker and license plates that read blissful. As she drove away, probably to consult her spirit guides about property law, I looked around the cabin that was now officially, legally, and mortgage-free LY mine. Uncle Pete's old recliner sat in the corner like a leather throne, surrounded by his collection of vintage beer cans and a bookshelf full of Louis L'Amour novels. If this was a sacred space, it was sacred to the memory of a man who thought the height of spirituality was a perfectly grilled trout and a sunset that didn't require anyone else's commentary. I cracked open a beer from Pete's remaining stash and settled into his chair, thinking this Karen situation would blow over once she realized I wasn't going anywhere. I should have known better. In my experience, people who name themselves after spiritual concepts rarely give up without a fight. And Karen Morrison was just getting started. Thursday morning arrived with the subtlety of a freight train carrying a mariachi band. At exactly 5:47 a.m., I was jolted awake by what sounded like a combination of wind chimes, singing bowls, and someone attempting to summon ancient spirits through interpretive dance. I stumbled to my bedroom window, still half asleep and completely unprepared for the sight that greeted me. My front yard had been transformed into what appeared to be a low-budget music festival for people who shop exclusively at Whole Foods. 12 adults in various states of athletic wear were arranged in a perfect circle on yoga mats, while Karen stood in the center wearing flowing white pants and a tank top that proclaimed Warrior Goddess in gold lettering. "Welcome, beautiful souls." Karen's voice drifted through my window like the sound of nails on a chalkboard dipped in honey. "Let's begin today's practice by honoring the sacred energy of this mountain sanctuary." I threw on yesterday's jeans and a hoodie, because apparently I needed to have this conversation before my coffee had even finished brewing. The irony wasn't lost on me that I was about to become the neighborhood grouch who yells at people for trespassing on his own property. "Good morning, everyone," I announced, stepping onto my porch with all the enthusiasm of someone about to explain why the party's over. "I hate to interrupt this spiritual gathering, but you're currently practicing your downward dogs on private property." The yoga circle turned toward me with expressions ranging from confused to mildly annoyed, like I'd just interrupted their favorite meditation podcast. Karen, however, maintained her serene smile with the determination of someone who'd clearly prepared for this moment. "Oh, wonderful. You're joining us," she exclaimed, as if I'd just volunteered to be the morning's human sacrifice. "I brought you a mat. The sunrise energy here is absolutely transformational." She gestured to a purple yoga mat positioned strategically near what used to be Uncle Pete's flower bed. The same flower bed he defended with the passion of a medieval knight protecting his castle. "I'm not joining anything," I said, stepping down from the porch. "What I am doing is asking all of you to leave my property. Right now." A woman in tie-dyed leggings raised her hand like she was in elementary school. "Excuse me, but isn't this a community space?" Karen told us the previous owner wanted it used for healing purposes. I looked at the woman, then at Karen, then at the growing collection of confused faces staring back at me. The previous owner was my uncle, and his idea of community healing was telling people to get off his lawn. Trust me, I have 30 years of family dinners to back that up. "Actually," Karen interjected, pulling out her phone with the precision of someone about to deliver a legal briefing. "According to Colorado state law, if a property has been used for community purposes for more than 90 days without objection from the owner, it establishes a pattern of public use." She read this like she'd memorized it, which probably meant she'd spent considerable time researching how to steal other people's property using legal loopholes and good intentions. "That's not how property law works," I replied, though I'll admit her confident delivery made me second-guess myself for about 3 seconds. "And even if it were, you've been trespassing for 3 months while the property was in probate. That's not community use. That's just regular old breaking and entering with extra stretching." The tie-dyed woman looked between Karen and me like she was watching a tennis match, played with legal documents and morning coffee. Maybe we should find another location. No, Karen said firmly, her spiritual serenity cracking just enough to reveal the steel underneath. This space has been consecrated by our practice. Moving our circle would disrupt months of energy work and spiritual investment. Spiritual investment. I was starting to think Karen had confused yoga practice with a real estate portfolio. Look, I said, addressing the group rather than their self-appointed guru. I'm sure you're all lovely people who just want to stretch and find your inner peace. But you're doing it in my backyard without permission, and that needs to stop. There are parks, community centers, and probably dozens of other places where you can practice your warrior poses without trespassing. A man in expensive running shoes nodded thoughtfully. He has a point. We could use the community center. The community center doesn't have the mountain energy vortex, Karen snapped, her warrior goddess facade slipping faster than someone attempting their first downward dog. This location is geographically aligned with healing ley lines. You can't just replicate that kind of spiritual infrastructure anywhere. Healing ley lines. I made a mental note to Google whether that was an actual thing or just something Karen had invented to justify her property invasion. The healing ley lines will survive without your Tuesday and Thursday interpretations, I said. But my patients won't. I'm giving everyone 5 minutes to pack up and find a new spiritual headquarters. As the group began reluctantly rolling up their mats and gathering their meditation bells, Karen approached me with the kind of determined stride usually reserved for people about to deliver ultimatums. This isn't over, she said quietly, her voice carrying all the menace of someone who'd weaponized wellness. This mountain called to us. Your uncle's spirit wants us here. And I'm going to make sure his wishes are honored, whether you understand the spiritual significance or not. She leaned closer, and I caught a whiff of expensive essential oils and barely contained entitlement. You can't stop destiny, and you can't fight the universe's plan for this sacred space. Maybe not, I replied, watching the last of her disciples load their yoga blocks into their Priuses and Subaru Outbacks. But I can definitely call the sheriff about trespassing. And I'm pretty sure the universe gave us property laws for a reason. Karen's serene mask finally cracked completely, revealing the kind of expression usually reserved for people who've just been told their favorite organic market is closing. Fine, but don't come crying to me when your chakras are completely misaligned from blocking positive energy flow. She gathered her meditation supplies with the dramatic flair of someone who'd clearly rehearsed this exit, loaded everything into her Tesla, and drove away with the kind of aggressive serenity that should probably be classified as its own form of road rage. As the dust settled and my coffee finally finished brewing, I surveyed my yard. 12 perfect rectangles of flattened grass marked where the yoga mats had been, like crop circles left by aliens who discovered Pilates. I should have felt victorious. Instead, I had the distinct feeling this was just round one, and Karen Morrison had been planning this fight a lot longer than I'd been preparing for it. The next 2 weeks passed in blissful, Karen-free silence. I spent my mornings drinking coffee on the porch, my afternoons exploring the hiking trails Uncle Pete had recommended in his letters, and my evenings learning how to operate a wood-burning stove without setting myself on fire. It was exactly the kind of peaceful mountain life I'd hoped for when I decided to leave my corporate job in Denver for this inherited slice of wilderness. Then the citations started arriving. The first one appeared tucked under my windshield wiper on a Tuesday morning, official-looking enough to make my coffee taste like liquid anxiety. Notice of community wellness violation. It read in bold letters across the top, followed by a detailed explanation of how I was disrupting established community health practices and denying public access to designated wellness resources. At the bottom, in official-looking signatures, was the name K. Morrison, Community Wellness Coordinator, and what appeared to be an official seal that looked suspiciously like it had been created on someone's home computer. I called the county office, thinking maybe there really was some obscure law about community wellness that I'd missed in my property research. The receptionist listened to my description of the citation, then put me on hold for so long I started wondering if she'd forgotten about me entirely. "Sir," she finally returned, "we have no record of any community wellness coordinator, and there's definitely no such thing as a wellness violation in our municipal code. Sounds like someone's creating their own legal documents." That's when I realized I wasn't dealing with garden variety entitlement anymore. This was premium, artisanal, small batch crazy with delusions of legal authority. The second citation appeared 3 days later, this time professionally laminated and posted directly to my front door with what appeared to be industrial-strength adhesive. Final notice: sacred space restoration required. Announced that I had 72 hours to restore community access or face escalated intervention procedures. Escalated intervention procedures. Karen had apparently graduated from fake citations to vague legal threats, which was impressive in its complete lack of actual legal foundation. I was still scraping laminated paper residue off my door when my neighbor, Ed, wandered over with his morning coffee and the expression of someone about to deliver news that nobody wanted to hear. "You might want to know," Ed said, nodding toward the road, "that Karen woman has been driving by your place about 6 times a day, taking pictures." "Pictures of what?" "Everything. Your car, your porch, that loose board on your front steps, the fact that you haven't mowed the lawn in 2 weeks." He sipped his coffee thoughtfully. "Also, she asked me if I'd noticed any disturbances to the natural energy patterns since you moved in." I stared at Ed, processing this information. "And what did you tell her?" "Told her the only energy disturbance I'd noticed was her driving up and down the road like she was conducting surveillance on a drug dealer." Ed grinned. "Don't think that was the answer she was looking for." That afternoon, I discovered exactly what Karen was building toward when I found a manila envelope wedged behind my mailbox. Inside was a collection of photographs showing various violations of what she termed mountain sanctuary maintenance standards. There was my car parked at what she claimed was an angle that disrupts natural energy flow, my trash cans positioned in a way that apparently blocked positive chi circulation, and a close-up of my front steps with an arrow pointing to a loose nail that she'd labeled as hazardous to community wellness practitioners. The final page was a formal-looking document titled Community Intervention Proposal, which outlined Karen's plan to restore proper stewardship of my property through guided community action. Reading between the lines of spiritual wellness jargon, it appeared to be a detailed plan for basically taking over my house, while claiming it was for everyone's benefit. According to Karen's proposal, she would coordinate daily wellness activities, translation, run yoga classes in my yard, maintain the sacred space according to traditional mountain energy principles, translation, redesign my property to her liking, and ensure proper respect for the spiritual significance of the location, translation, do whatever she wanted while claiming cosmic authority. The best part was her suggested stewardship fee of $150 per month that I would pay her for the privilege of having my property managed according to her spiritual vision. It was like being charged rent to live in your own house, except the landlord thought they were doing you a favor by balancing your chakras without permission. I called my lawyer friend Marcus back in Denver, figuring it was time to get some actual legal advice before Karen escalated from fake citations to whatever came next in her playbook of entitled spirituality. "Let me get this straight," Marcus said after I read him the highlights of Karen's intervention proposal. "This woman wants you to pay her to use your property for her business, and she's claiming it's for your own spiritual good? That's the basic idea, yeah. And she's been taking surveillance photos and creating fake legal documents?" "Pretty much." Marcus was quiet for a moment. "You know what this sounds like to me? It sounds like someone who's planning something bigger than just yoga classes. Document everything, take pictures of everything she gives you, and maybe invest in some security cameras. People this entitled don't usually stop at fake citations." That evening, as I was installing a trail camera I'd ordered online, I spotted Karen's Tesla parked at the end of my driveway. She was sitting in the driver's seat, talking on her phone and gesturing dramatically at my cabin. Even from a distance, I could see the kind of animated conversation that usually involves phrases like legal action and community rights. When she noticed me watching her, Karen rolled down her window and called out, I hope you're reconsidering your position. The universe doesn't appreciate blocked energy, and neither does the community. The universe seems fine with property rights. I called back, and the community includes me. She drove away with the kind of aggressive acceleration that suggested our next encounter was going to be significantly less subtle than fake citations and laminated threats. As I finished setting up the camera, I couldn't shake the feeling that Karen's escalated intervention procedures were about to become a lot more concrete than spiritual energy management. And judging by her track record so far, whatever came next was going to make fake community wellness violations look like amateur hour. I woke up Saturday morning to the sound of construction equipment and what appeared to be a full-scale wellness invasion happening in my front yard. Through my bedroom window, I could see Karen directing a crew of people who were setting up what looked like a permanent yoga pavilion, complete with raised wooden platforms, storage benches for meditation supplies, and string lights that probably cost more than my monthly grocery budget. What the hell? I muttered, grabbing my phone to check the time. 6:15 a.m. Because apparently Karen believed that trespassing was more spiritually effective before sunrise. I threw on clothes and rushed outside to find Karen supervising the installation of what appeared to be a hand-carved wooden sign that read, Pinecrest Mountain Wellness Sanctuary, Community Healing Space. She was dressed in full spiritual warrior regalia, flowing white pants, a vest covered in meaningful-looking symbols, and enough turquoise jewelry to supply a small southwestern gift shop. "Good morning," she called out cheerfully, like she was greeting me at my own housewarming party. "We decided to surprise you with the community wellness installation. Isn't it beautiful?" I stood there in my pajama pants and yesterday's t-shirt, watching strangers build a yoga studio on my property while Karen beamed at me like she'd just delivered the world's most thoughtful gift. "Are you completely insane?" I asked, which seemed like the only reasonable response to finding your home being converted into a wellness center without your knowledge or consent. "Actually, I prefer spiritually proactive," Karen replied, consulting what appeared to be an architectural blueprint. "After our last conversation, I realized you were suffering from blocked chakras that were preventing you from seeing the bigger picture. So the community decided to take healing action on your behalf." She gestured toward her construction crew, which consisted of about 8 people who looked like they'd been recruited from a crystal healing convention. Everyone volunteered their time and expertise to create this sacred space. It's really a beautiful example of community cooperation. Community cooperation would be asking permission before building things on my property, I said, walking over to examine the wooden platform they'd somehow managed to construct while I was sleeping. "This is just trespassing with power tools." A woman in a Coexist t-shirt looked up from where she was installing solar-powered meditation bells. "We tried to work with you, but you were resisting the healing energy. Sometimes the universe requires more direct intervention." Direct intervention. Right. Because nothing says spiritual enlightenment, like ignoring property laws and building unauthorized structures on someone else's land. "Look, everyone," I said, addressing the group rather than Karen, who had clearly moved beyond reasonable conversation into some sort of spiritual real estate fantasy. "I appreciate that you all want a nice place to do your yoga, but you can't just build it on my property without permission. This is illegal construction, and I'm going to have to call the sheriff." "Actually," Karen said, pulling out yet another laminated document, "according to Colorado adverse possession laws, if we improve the property and maintain it for the community benefit, we can establish legal claim to the space we're using." She handed me the paper with the confidence of someone who'd clearly spent considerable time researching how to steal property through legal loopholes and good intentions. It was a printout of adverse possession statutes, highlighted in bright yellow marker and annotated with Karen's own interpretations of how they applied to spiritual community development. "That's not how adverse possession works," I said, though Karen's confident delivery was starting to make me wonder if there was some obscure law that let people claim your house if they did enough yoga on it. And even if it were, you can't just decide to possess someone's property because you think it would make a nice meditation center. The law is very clear about property improvement and community benefit," Karen replied, pointing to a highlighted section that had nothing to do with anything she was claiming. "We're not stealing your land. We're honoring its highest purpose." That's when I noticed Marcus, my lawyer friend, walking up my driveway with the expression of someone who'd just driven 4 hours through mountain roads to witness what promised to be the most entertaining legal disaster of his career. "Did you call in reinforcements?" Karen asked, eyeing Marcus suspiciously. "I called in someone who actually understands property law," I said. "Marcus, meet Karen. Karen, meet the lawyer who's about to explain why you can't claim my house through interpretive dance and positive thinking." Marcus surveyed the scene, the unauthorized construction, the spiritual wellness signage, and Karen's collection of laminated legal documents. Then he pulled out his phone and started taking pictures with the methodical precision of someone building a very straightforward trespassing case. "Ma'am," he said to Karen, "I'm going to need you and your construction crew to stop what you're doing and remove everything you've built on this property. Right now." "We're operating under community wellness provisions," Karen replied, showing Marcus her highlighted adverse possession research. "This is completely legal community improvement activity." Marcus examined Karen's documents with the kind of professional patience usually reserved for explaining basic concepts to particularly stubborn children. "This is a printout of adverse possession law that has absolutely nothing to do with what you're doing here. Adverse possession requires 20 years of continuous occupation, among other things. You can't just build a yoga studio on someone's property and claim it's yours because you think it's spiritually important. But we've invested time, energy, and materials into creating this sacred space," protested the woman with the meditation bells. "Doesn't that count for something?" "It counts as trespassing, construction without permits, and potentially vandalism," Marcus replied. "And if you don't remove everything within the next hour, it's going to count as criminal trespassing, which comes with considerably less pleasant legal consequences." I watched Karen's spiritual serenity evaporate in real time as the reality of actual legal expertise collided with her fantasy of cosmic property rights. Her flowing white pants and meaningful jewelry suddenly looked less like spiritual warrior regalia and more like an expensive costume for someone who'd badly miscalculated their legal position. "This isn't over," she said, gathering her construction crew and her laminated legal research. "The universe has a plan for this space, and you can't fight destiny." "Maybe not," I replied, "but I can definitely fight trespassing charges. And I'm pretty sure the universe gave us building permits for a reason." As Karen's crew began dismantling their unauthorized wellness pavilion, I couldn't help but feel like this was still just the setup for whatever finale Karen had planned. Someone who'd researched adverse possession law and organized a construction crew wasn't likely to give up just because a real lawyer had pointed out that her legal theories were completely fictional. But for now, I was content to watch 8 adults disassemble a yoga studio while muttering about blocked chakras and cosmic injustice. Sometimes the universe's sense of humor was absolutely perfect. 2 weeks passed and what I foolishly believed was victory. The unauthorized wellness pavilion had been completely removed. Karen had stopped driving by my house every day, and I'd even started to relax enough to enjoy my morning coffee without checking for trespassing yogis. That's when Karen launched her nuclear option. She called the media. I first learned about the mountain sanctuary controversy when my neighbor Ed came over with his laptop, grinning like someone about to show me the most entertaining disaster of the year. "You're famous," he announced, turning the screen toward me. There, on the local news website, was a full article titled "Corporate Refugee Denies Community Access to Sacred Healing Space." The accompanying photo showed Karen in her full spiritual warrior outfit, standing in front of my cabin with tears in her eyes and her hands pressed to her heart in what appeared to be a pose of deep spiritual anguish. According to the article, I was a big city corporate refugee who had callously destroyed a beloved community wellness space that had served local residents for years. Karen was quoted extensively, describing how the mountain sanctuary had been a vital resource for community healing and how my aggressive legal intimidation had traumatized local spiritual practitioners. "This sacred space called to us," the article quoted Karen as saying. Pete welcomed our healing circle with open arms, and now his nephew is trying to erase that beautiful legacy with threats and corporate lawyers. It breaks my heart to see such spiritual violence inflicted on a place that has brought so much peace to our community. Spiritual violence. I had to give Karen credit for creativity, even if her relationship with actual facts was more of a casual acquaintance than a committed partnership. The article went on to describe me as someone who had arrived from the corporate world with no understanding of mountain community values and was systematically dismantling years of established spiritual practice. It mentioned my hostile confrontations with peaceful wellness practitioners and my use of intimidating legal tactics to deny community access to a space that had been freely shared for generations. The comments section was exactly what you'd expect. A mixture of outrage from people who believed Karen's version of events and skepticism from locals who apparently knew Karen's track record with property that didn't belong to her. She tried the same thing with the Johnson place 2 years ago, wrote someone named Mountain Mike 53. Claimed their backyard was a natural amphitheater meant for drum circles. Johnson's had to get a restraining order. Karen Morrison thinks every property in the county should be available for her wellness business, added Colorado resident. She's been trying to turn the whole mountain into her personal yoga retreat for years. But the damage was done. By afternoon, I had 3 voicemails from people who'd read the article and wanted to express their feelings about my spiritual violence and corporate greed. One woman actually called to tell me that my chakras were permanently misaligned, and I would never find peace until I honored the sacred space. That evening, Karen showed up at my door with a film crew from the local access channel and what appeared to be a formal petition signed by at least 40 people demanding restoration of community access to the Pinecrest Mountain Sanctuary. "We're here to give you one final opportunity to do the right thing," Karen announced, standing in front of the camera with the kind of dramatic presence usually reserved for people delivering ultimatums to supervillains. "The community is asking you to honor Pete's legacy and restore access to this sacred healing space." Behind her, the film crew was getting establishing shots of my cabin, my car, and probably my mailbox, like they were documenting some sort of environmental disaster rather than a property dispute with someone who thought she could claim my house through interpretive dance. "Your uncle would be ashamed of what you've done to his memory," Karen continued, her voice carrying the kind of wounded righteousness that suggested she actually believed her own performance. "He opened his heart and his home to our healing circle, and you've turned it into a fortress of corporate selfishness." I looked at Karen, then at the camera, then at the petition she was waving like a spiritual battle flag, and something inside me snapped. Not in an angry way, but in the way that happens when you suddenly realize you're done playing defense and ready to go on offense. "You know what?" I said, stepping onto my porch with the kind of calm that usually precedes spectacular verbal disasters. "Let's talk about my Uncle Pete." Karen smiled triumphantly, clearly thinking she'd finally broken through my corporate resistance to embrace the healing power of community wellness. "Uncle Pete," I continued, "was the kind of man who once spent 3 hours explaining to a door-to-door solar panel salesman exactly why his product was a waste of money, a waste of time, and a waste of the oxygen it took to explain it. He was not, by any stretch of anyone's imagination, someone who welcomed strangers onto his property for group activities." Karen's smile began to flicker. "In fact," I said, warming to my theme, "the only healing circle Uncle Pete ever participated in involved him, a bottle of bourbon, and anyone willing to listen to his theories about why modern society was going to hell in a handbasket. He thought yoga was something you did to milk cows, and the closest he ever came to meditation was the 5 minutes of silence before he told someone to get off his lawn." The camera was still rolling, and I could see the operator trying not to smile. "So when you claim he welcomed your spiritual practices with open arms, what you're actually claiming is that a man who posted no trespassing signs in 3 different languages somehow became a guru of community wellness in the months before he died. At age 78. With emphysema. Karen's wounded righteousness was starting to look more like someone who just realized their GPS had been giving them directions to the wrong destination for several hours. Furthermore, I continued, since we're talking about legal and moral obligations, let's discuss the fact that you've been operating an unlicensed business on private property, creating fake legal documents, organizing unauthorized construction projects, and harassing a property owner who's done nothing more than exist in his own house. I pulled out my phone and showed the camera the collection of Karen's citations, legal threats, and surveillance photos that I'd been documenting for weeks. This is what community wellness looks like according to Karen Morrison. Fake legal documents, trespassing, construction without permits, and media manipulation when the fake legal documents don't work. Karen's spiritual serenity had completely evaporated, leaving behind the kind of expression usually seen on people who've just realized they've been caught in a lie by someone with better evidence than they expected. The truth is, I concluded, Karen Morrison doesn't want a community wellness space. She wants to run a business on someone else's property without paying rent, and when that didn't work, she decided to steal the property through fake legal claims and public relations campaigns. The cameraman was definitely smiling now, and even Karen's petition-wielding supporters were starting to look like people who'd just realized they'd been recruited for someone else's personal vendetta. So here's my final offer, I said, addressing the camera directly. Karen can find a legal location for her yoga classes, get proper permits for any construction projects, and stop harassing me on my own property. Or she can continue her spiritual war against property rights and deal with the legal consequences. I paused for effect, channeling every dramatic courtroom speech I'd ever seen in movies. Because the universe might have a plan, but so does the sheriff's department. And I'm pretty sure their plan involves actual consequences for people who think enlightenment comes with the right to ignore other people's property rights. Karen gathered her media crew and her petition with the kind of dignified retreat usually reserved for generals who've just realized they've been fighting the wrong war with the wrong army. As they loaded into their cars, I heard her telling the cameraman that they probably had enough footage for their story. 3 days later, the local access channel aired Mountain Property Dispute, two sides of the story. Karen's spiritual anguish occupied exactly 37 seconds of the final edit, while my impromptu legal and historical breakdown of her claims took up most of the remaining segment. The comments on the online version were even better than I'd hoped. Holy crap, this Karen lady is completely insane. That guy just destroyed her entire fake legal argument in 5 minutes. Can we get him to run for county commissioner? He actually knows what property rights are. Karen Morrison's cosmic crusade for my property ended not with a bang, but with a whimper and a public humiliation that probably violated several of her chakras. She moved her healing circle to a rented space in town, where she presumably had to pay actual rent and follow actual laws like a regular human being. I kept the trail camera up for another month, just in case Karen's universe had any more plans for my property. But apparently, even cosmic destiny has its limits when it comes to well-documented trespassing charges and public embarrassment. These days, I enjoy my morning coffee in peace, surrounded by the kind of sacred energy that comes from legal property ownership and neighbors who understand the difference between community spirit and entitled theft. And if the universe has any complaints about my spiritual alignment, it can take it up with my property deed and my very satisfied lawyer. Sometimes the best karma is just watching entitled people discover that the real world has rules, and those rules don't care about your chakras. Uncle Pete would have been proud, not of the spiritual enlightenment, but of the fact that I'd managed to defend his territory without having to chase anyone off with a spatula. Though honestly, after dealing with Karen Morrison's cosmic real estate ambitions, the spatula method was starting to look pretty reasonable. The mountain air is still thin, the Wi-Fi is still thinner, and my front yard is still blissfully free of unauthorized wellness pavilions. And that, according to my perfectly aligned chakras and my completely legitimate property rights, is exactly how the universe intended it to be. Thank you for being with us. Please share in the comments where you are watching from and whether you liked everything, and see you next time.